I think that that you need to adapt the story. You need to choose the stories that will be effective for your listeners and the stories that they can hear and understand. So you would need to adapt your stories for that. So here's another very short story. And some of the stories that I have in mind to tell you have similar meanings. So you can see how this is a little bit different. There were two neighbors. This is a story from the Middle East. There were two neighbors, and one of them had fallen on hard times. One of them had a hard situation. He needed money. He was in debt. He owed a lot of money. And finally, he decided the only way to get out of his debt, out of the money that he owed, would be to sell his house. And so he told his neighbor, "Oh, I am so sorry, but I have to sell my house and move somewhere else because I need the money. I owe money to everyone." And the neighbor said, "How much money are you asking for your house?" And he said, "Well, I am asking 1,000 dinar." And the neighbor said, "Your house is not big. It is not fancy. It is not in good condition. It is not worth 1,000 dinar. It is worth maybe 500, maybe less. Why can you sell it? Do you think you can sell it for 1,000 dinar?" And the man said, "Well, you are right, of course. My house is not big. It is not fancy. My house is not worth 1,000 dinar. But the neighbors are wonderful. And it's the neighbors that make my house worth 1,000 dinar." And his friend, the neighbor, liked that he said so much that he paid off his debts. So the man did not have to sell his house. Now that is a very small story, but it is a little bit, it has some of the same things as the first story. What is worth a lot to you? Something you can sell? So in this story, if you understood it, can you say, what was it that made his house worth a lot of money? So I don't know how much a dinar is worth, but in the place where this story comes from in the Middle East, then a dinar, so 1,000 dinar apparently would be a lot of money. 1,000, like $1,000 or 1,000 pounds or 1,000 francs or something like that, apparently was a lot of money. So he wanted to sell his house for a lot of money. And the neighbor said, "Your house is not worth that." And he said, "My house is not worth it. But the neighborhood, I have great neighbors. I live in a great neighborhood. And so that's why my house is worth 1,000 dinar." Is your neighborhood the thing that makes your house desirable, valuable? Do you live in a good neighborhood? So if you did have really good neighbors and everybody would help each other all the time, then one of the points of this story is that would be valuable. That would make your house valuable, I think. So you would love to move into a neighborhood where your neighbors were helpful and kind and friendly, and maybe you could get together and have parties or have meetings, and they would support you. And if you were sick or you had a hard time, like Joseph, you are sick. If you had great neighbors, they would come to your house and give you food and medicine. Sometimes with children who spend a lot of time doing video games, you can ask them to make up stories about the characters in their games. Because video games are just one story after another, so many stories. And kids who know video games, they can make up stories. And maybe you could make up stories about their favorite games too. But what I imagine with this story is that if you are in a position to hire someone for your company, or to, for example, if you're teaching students, small children, and you want parents to sign their children up, you can say, this is the price for this service. This is the price for this school. This is the price for this car. This is the price for whatever. But it is not the thing that is the most important. It is the atmosphere. It is the neighbors. So if you're teaching small children, you say, it's a school and it costs this much, but you want your child there because of the environment. Great teachers, great students, friendly atmosphere. Your child will be happy here. And if you're selling a house, you say, this is the house, and it is a good house, but you want to buy this house because it is in a good place. The people, the neighbors are good. They will help you. They will support you. They will make your life better. So small story like this is good to use when you are encouraging people to make a decision to do something, to look beyond just what the price tag is, to say, what makes this a good thing? Why do you want to do this thing? Because it will make you happy. So I think that just people say, you can show a big chart with statistics, but if you tell a story, that will convince people to do things. So if you have a few small stories in mind, it will convince people. It is a good thing. I think that, as I said, one of the best ways to practice is to really speak the story.
Sure.
Don't just read it. Don't just think about it, but tell it.
Right.
It to a wall, to your cat, to your baby, to a stuffed animal.
Right.
But speak the story out loud, and that will help you more than anything else to be able to tell stories. But this wasn't really what I had planned, but I want to say that if you are telling stories to children, and it's hard because it is not in your native language, in your first language, you should look for stories that have a lot of repetition. I don't think I told you this before, but here's a story that is very, very easy to tell. Once upon a time, there was a frog. Did I tell you this? He had a very big mouth. Did I tell you this story before? Okay, he was a big mouth frog. He had children, and he wanted to feed them a meal, but he didn't know what they wanted to eat. So he thought he would ask his neighbors, and he hopped down the path until he came to a neighbor. The neighbor was, and I will give you a clue, you will know this, and if you were telling this to children, they would be able to guess. The neighbor was a meow. Now, that may be different in Korean, but in English, meow would be a cat. So the big mouth frog said, hello, Mrs. Cat. What do you feed your babies? I am a big mouth frog. Can you help? And the cat said, meow. I feed my babies. What do cats eat? Cat food, fish, things like that. And the big mouth frog said, wow, that's very interesting. I don't think my frogs would like that. Thanks. And the big mouth frog went hopping down the path until he came to another neighbor. This neighbor was a woof, 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 a dog. And the big mouth frog said, "Hi, Mrs. Dog. I'm a big mouth frog. What do you feed your babies?" And the dog said, "Woof, I feed my babies dog food and bones and meat." "Wow, that's interesting. I don't think my babies would like that. Thanks." And the big mouth frog went hopping, hopping, hopping down the path till it came to another neighbor. This was a bird. "Hi, Mrs. Bird. I'm a big mouth frog. What do you feed your babies?" And the bird said, "I feed my babies seeds and grain and worms." "Wow, that's very interesting. I don't think my babies would like that." And the big mouth frog went hopping, hopping, hopping down the path till it came to another neighbor. The neighbor was a snake, a snake. And the big mouth frog said, "Hi, Mrs. Snake. I was wondering, what do you feed your babies?" And the snake said, "I feed my babies big mouth frogs." And the big mouth frog said, "Wow, oh, that's really interesting. I am a small mouth frog. Well, goodbye." And the big mouth frog that was pretending to be a small mouth frog went hopping, hopping, hopping away. I don't know what he fed his babies, but he never asked his neighbor, the snake, for advice ever again. Now, I like that story because it's fun to tell. But if you are telling a story in a language that you are learning to children who don't speak that language very, very well, this kind of story is very effective. It repeats itself. So easy to remember. A big mouth frog. And you have to make your mouth big when you talk. And the big mouth frog visits 4 neighbors. I always do cat, dog, bird, snake. But it doesn't matter. If you don't remember that, it could be a cow or a horse or a sheep or a guinea pig, anything. It doesn't matter. Except, and your students or the people you're talking to, they could suggest things to you. They have ideas. But the last one has to be a snake or maybe a crocodile. Something that would eat a frog.
Yes.
And in fact, I always do 4, but you could do 5. You could do 3. It's very, very flexible. So if you are thinking of telling stories and you think it might be hard, look for a story like that where something repeats. It's exactly the same in like 4 different ways. The only new words you have to say and the only new words the listeners will have to know are just the different animals. And you can make motions being big and ooh, ooh, and you can make sounds that a dog or a cat or a bird would make. It's a very easy story to tell. And there are other stories like that that are easy to tell. Maybe you know the story of the 3 billy goats gruff that went over the bridge. Another 3 billy goats, very easy to tell. So I think that that you need to adapt the story. You need to choose the stories that will be effective for your listeners and the stories that they can hear and understand. So you would need to adapt your stories for that.